What I'm going to be doing, you might be a little bit surprised by, but actually it's not that surprising from the standpoint that I was going to get this in last month, but I couldn't. We had too many activities, and with Brother Petrillo here and such as that, last month had 5 Sundays, right? But I was not able to get in a question and answer session, and there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, because we were interfered with schedule-wise, and the second thing is that you all did not put any questions in that little box out there. If you want me to answer questions, you've got to put them in the little box, okay? You can ask them of me personally. I may or may not remember it. However, you can best get your question answered by putting it in the little box. And no, preacher, why don't you get out of town is not the kind of question I am talking about. So, put your little questions in the box. But I do have other questions, things that have come up, have been more immediately asked of me to deal with, or things that I have been able to pull from a previous pool of questions that I used to answer when I was on a television program down in southern Middle Tennessee out of Graymere Church of Christ back when I was preaching in Culleoka. So combining all of these together, we're going to deal with some questions and answers tonight. I should probably tell you, I do not, and I don't know how much any of you remember from me saying this before, I do not answer things the same way that Rob did. I noticed in looking back on some of Rob's videos, if you want in-depth Bible answers on specific questions and deal with, like, I don't know, 3 of them a service, you know, that kind of thing, then Rob's your man. He was taking care of it that way. Mr. Tim does not think that deeply. And I just don't, I can answer sometimes a question like that, but you have to give me like months, you know, to prepare. If you want me to answer a question, I generally am going to answer it in like a minute or 2. So these are like 2-minute answers for a variety of Bible questions. I like to get in about 10 of them in a service. And so let's go ahead and get started. I may even get in 11 this time. We'll just see how it goes. But they are short answer from the Bible, just different things that have come up or that have been asked of me in the past that I've had to deal with. Okay, number 1. First one. How are we to believe that all mankind started from Adam and Eve? You know the idea that you started from there? Now the evolutionists would say, of course, that you just oozed from the goose. So you've got the amoeba all the way up to the man. Well, we don't believe that. And so people say, how am I supposed to believe that everything began from Adam and Eve? For example, if you had 2 people, Adam and Eve, from 2 people you're going to get all those races, for example, they say. The answer to that would be in how God made us from the Old Testament and the New Testament. So let's go over and look at a New Testament passage. This is 1 Corinthians 15. 1 Corinthians 15 and in verse 45. You think about how God made people. You know that we all must be made basically of the same stuff, because there is no human race and then a subhuman race. That's positively Nazi type stuff, isn't it? We don't have that. It was because of the belief in eugenics and stuff that existed earlier in the both United States and across the world that we got the rise both of Nazism and the proliferation of abortion through various people that were pushing it with the idea that some people are just not as much human or not as good to be human as others. But we don't believe that from the Bible. We believe that everybody is of the same blood. And so if you look here in 1 Corinthians 15 and in verse 45, it says, the first man, Adam, was made a living soul. The last Adam was made a quickening spirit. The last Adam of verse 45 is Jesus Christ, okay? If you don't understand that from the layout of Scripture, that's who he's talking about, Jesus. The first Adam was made a living soul. If Adam was not a real historical figure that everybody came from, then 1 Corinthians 15:45 makes no sense. You can't have it. But if he was a real historical figure and you believe the Bible, then you know everybody came from Adam and Eve. If you say, well, I just have a hard time believing that, then you don't believe the Bible. 1 Corinthians 15:45. This is not Old Testament here. The New Testament backs up that the Old Testament was telling a real, literal story, not just talking about things in some kind of allegory, not trying to just paint a picture for us. That's the way it actually happened. The first Adam, if there was no first Adam, his illustration makes no sense, became a living soul. Either he did or he didn't. Paul says the last Adam, Jesus Christ, was made a quickening spirit. If Jesus is the last Adam, it makes no sense if he was not also a human being. Well, you say the first Adam was not a Semite because Shem never was even born when Adam was made. That's right. Well, then how do we get all the races then? Jesus was a Semite. He's Semitic. And others came from Ham and others came from Japheth. So how do you get all of that and all the races from those if you have this same Adam? How do you get Jesus then, who's a Semite, but somebody else is not a Semite, as far as even his physical appearance? That one's easy. If you look back in Genesis chapter 11, chapters 10 and 11, the nations started spreading out, didn't they? And as the people spread out, in order to get them to spread, they first of all got the idea, we'll band together and build this Tower of Babel. Y'all remember that scene, right? God diversified the languages of the people. At the same time, I personally believe that He caused them to diversify in other ways. Nobody denies, now church, listen to me closely. You know I don't believe in this, so you listen close. Nobody denies microevolution. Nobody denies that. No scientist, whether they're called creationists or whatever, no teacher in the brotherhood, anybody you've ever had come in here to teach you, nobody denies microevolution. It's easy to prove that. It happens all the time. What is microevolution? It means you can have change among a kind of creature, and that variation was built in by God. And He changes them according to His wishes. So you got Adam and Eve. From Adam and Eve, it is possible, and this has been easily proven, to put in them the dominant and recessive genes to account for genetic variation for all races. It's easy to do that. If you want to see proof of that in a technical way, you can look at some material by Apologetics Press, okay? And they will easily prove it. You can get all the races naturally, knowing that God naturally diversified people and put them into different parts of the earth and said, you dwell here and I'll make you fit for this atmosphere. It is fit for people in the Norwegian countries to be fair-skinned because they receive very indirect sunlight and they don't need to have qualities that would be able to build up resistance to the sun. It is not fitting for people that live near the Sahara to be exposed to a whole lot of sunlight that they can't handle. Yesterday we had the first big day of sun that we've had all year, right? How many of y'all got a burn? Yeah, I got a little burn on me. Yeah, I know some of you. Yeah. Jude got a big burn on him. Yeah, even Sahara got a little burn maybe or something, but they got burns, people did. The reason that you get a burn on you folks is that most of us in this assembly, and pretty much all of us, are not really suited for a whole lot of sun. You need more melanin in your skin. That doesn't make you a different kind of creature. It simply means you have micro-evolved. You've changed to the setting in which you are in. Nobody denies that. That's something that easily happens within a kind. Everybody goes to whatever suits their environment, and that's how you account for a lot of the change, or a lot of the diversity. Okay, second question. Tim, how can I get the most out of my card ministry? Do you realize that letters are the basis of the revelation of God in the Bible? Do y'all know that? I was very warmed inside my heart to hear that many of you all, in addition to our organized visitation, have your own personal card ministries. Isn't that neat? That you have a family that has devoted themselves to working with people and encouraging them, even if you can't be right in front of them, by virtue of sending letters, sending cards, things like that. In the Bible, what is the book of Romans? Right after Acts, what is Romans? It's a letter, isn't it? Before Romans, you've got a letter not to a church, but to an individual. I wrote unto thee, most excellent Theophilus, right? So he had written Luke, and then he writes Acts. These are letters, ladies and gentlemen. The whole basis of the encouragement given in the Bible is it was done by letter. That's no substitute for the direct, personal, eye-to-eye visitation, but it is an additional help and an additional ministry. How can we make it better? Well, I'm not really qualified to tell a church that's doing more than any of them I've ever gone to about exactly how you would improve what you're doing, except to say this. There is something that I can mention to you. We got a prayer list, right? We put it out each week. It's something I've had to get used to as far as the nature of it. I was contacted by Brother Rob on the setup and everything, the designs of it. Okay, we have in this prayer list, I got to looking at this week's. There are 3 individuals on here that are not put down because of health reasons. These are not get well or sympathy situations. Jimmy Gentry was just baptized yesterday. He's on the list, but he's not there because of his recent health problems. He's on there because he was baptized. That means when you go back there, you pick a card appropriate for rejoicing with him, right? And there are cards back there for that. When the visitation team goes back there and they see the name Bryson Cherry. All right, Bryson's not here tonight, so I'm not going to embarrass him. That's the boy that's dating my daughter, Lauren. Now, there's nothing wrong with Bryson, other than the fact that he's dating my daughter. But when you've got a situation where he visits here because Lauren is trying to get him, over to church, then what does that allow us to do? Well, when he's here, it allows us to come up and shake his hand and get to know him, right? That's fine. But in addition to that, when he was put on this list, it was so we could send him a thank you card. And there are some of those back there. And so you get a thank you card out, and you send it saying, we appreciate you coming by and seeing us at church. And the reason I said that is because my daughter contacted me. She texted me. She said, Dad, people are asking Bryson what's wrong with him. What it was is when we put him on here, they assumed it was a get well, didn't they? It's not a get well. There's nothing wrong with Bryson. That is why you pull a different card for him. So pay attention to that very carefully. I knew that we had a little bit of a problem on that. When we came here, I don't know that I ever shared this with Connie, but when we came here, you all showered us with cards. And, Connie's just boo-hooing and everything. Oh, this is just wonderful. Oh, they're giving us cards and everything. It was very impressive. We got stacks of cards, and that was great. In those stacks, somebody sort of signed one time, and you grabbed the wrong card. I didn't know I needed to recover from something, but evidently I did. So I knew what they meant. They meant to welcome me, but you grabbed the wrong card. Make sure you grab the right card when you encourage somebody. I give you one more little thing. When you send off in a card ministry, the other indirect thing you can do, that is, they may not ever know it, but you're praying for those people. Pray over this list. Take it home and pray over it, okay? You think about them at night when you say your prayers for your family and such. Pray over it, and that will help you a lot. All right, James Pratt's on the list. Now, Brother Pratt, of course, James Pratt is not on there because anything's wrong with him other than he's deployed to Afghanistan. He needs our prayers, like we pray about and stuff for our service members and everything. So most of them are get well in sympathy, and all of them are intended for evangelism, but a few of them have special purposes, and we need to keep that in mind to make the ministry just a little bit better. Okay, next question. Why can't I understand the King James Bible? This evening I happen to have a King James up here with me. Why can I not understand the King James Bible? What is a good way to study for understanding? The main thing in order to get you to understand the King James Bible is to not worry or get hung up so much thinking that it's hard to understand. If you have difficulties with it, these things go away with the reading. The reason that we push the King James is not that if you cannot handle early modern English, technically King James is modern English, by the way. Modern English actually began in the 1500s. But it's the reason people cannot understand it is because they build up this resistance among themselves. Well, I don't get the idea of doeth or dost. I don't get that. Why can't they just say do or does? You can say do or does. And if you really struggle with that, there's something called the New King James. But the problem is everybody knows the New King James just isn't as pretty. How do you make Psalm 23 as pretty as the King James? You don't, do you? Every time they fiddle with it, it's not as pretty. It may be just as accurate, it's not as pretty. And so a lot of us preachers still preach a lot from the King James because it's still got that pretty language. If you would like to make a connection there, and you want to study on the King James, the best advice I can give you is don't worry about it. If you come across a word that has an F on the end of it and such as that, just don't worry about it. As long as you understood it in context, over time, you will understand it as you read or as you listen to it. You'll get an ear for it. It's kind of like going to a Shakespearean play. When you first go to a Shakespeare play, you think, these people talk funny. And everybody that hears us, if you're going to that play up north, they're thinking, this guy over here at this play talks funny. Because we talk funny from the South too, don't we? But we're still speaking English. And the fact is that he's presented it in English, and you understand the play. You appreciate that it is quality English and it sounds good. So you can understand the language of the King James if you just don't sweat it too much. Don't worry about it. Just let it flow, and you will understand it as you go through it. You'll get used to the these and thous and the eths and all that kind of stuff. It just comes natural. It's no big deal. Okay, next question. What kind of things can I do to encourage my child at this time of year? We've got prom and other stuff coming up. Well, we just had an announcement, right? That we are going to have a meeting concerning prom alternative. Do you know how many areas and congregations and communities, really of churches and such, would love the idea of having an alternative? And if you don't have that, that's when you get a lot of pressure, don't you? Somebody says, well, why do you need that kind of a thing? Well, it avoids a whole lot of the modern day pressures that go along with not just prom, but any of the modern day dance styles. Preacher, all they're doing over there are like over in PE class where they do a line dance. That's not all they do. I deny it. Or if you want to prove to me otherwise, bring me the tape. Bring me the tape. But don't act like I'm a doofus or that I don't know what goes on at these things. I do, and I deny it. That's not all the kind of dancing that they do. In the Bible, you had Herodias dancing before the king, didn't you? Folks, that's the kind of dancing we don't want. So if you want to find the easiest way to avoid that, the sensual kind, then you avoid the temptation, and if you have an alternative, you have an opportunity for that, then you put all kinds of money and time behind it, and your children will enjoy it, and they will never miss being a part of worldly activities. Isn't that pretty straightforward with that? I believe that makes sense. And therefore, if you want to participate or help, then begin by the meeting this evening, and then follow through with the days to come. Okay. I'm sure there's brethren that can tell you here about ways in which you can help and participate in that. Okay, next question. In the book of Acts, God tells Paul to be of good courage. You must appear in Rome. I hate reading other people's questions. I never know where they're headed. Why was Paul discouraged? What was the urgency for him to go to Rome? I know he had to go to trial, but was there a job for him to do there in Rome? Okay, this was all a part of the plan of God, wasn't it? God had everything planned out for the gospel to be spread. Remember that book of 1 Corinthians we were at? Go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 2. 1 Corinthians chapter 2. In 1 Corinthians 2 and in verses 1 through 3. So you're in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 2, 1 through 3. Brethren, when I came to you, I did not come with excellency of speech or of wisdom, declaring unto you the testimony of God. I determined not to know anything among you, save Jesus Christ and Him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. Paul did not know he would be headed to the Corinthians. God knew it, didn't he? Paul did not have his druthers in this. Paul thought he would go up at one point and preach in what we call Turkey today, up in the northern parts and up in the Balkans. God said, no. Instead of going to the Balkans, you go into southern Greece. And I want you to spread the gospel over there in places like Corinth. God was directing the whole affair. And when Paul came among them, then he had to be encouraged because he didn't know. God knew, but he did not know. That's why God said to him, be of good courage, you must appear in Rome. When Paul was traveling around, God not only wanted him to go to Greece, but He wanted him to be able to travel all the way over into Italy by way of the sea. God made that possible by Paul being arrested back in Palestine and then eventually transported by charge of the Roman authorities over to Rome. God wanted him in Rome. And therefore, Paul was ready to suffer for the kingdom of heaven's sake and to be there in Rome. If you turn back in your Bibles a little bit to Acts chapter 23, so flip back just a few pages. Acts 23 and verse 11. The night following, the Lord stood by Paul. He said to him, now these are the words of the Lord to Paul, be of good cheer, Paul, as you have testified of me in Jerusalem, So you must bear witness at Rome. Everybody knows about Paul's shipwreck and such as that. That wasn't going to kill Paul, was it? God had previously designated, you're going to be in Rome. You're going to spread Christianity. Have you all ever wondered how you got the church universal and everywhere across the world, and it is to this very day? Why didn't the church go like all those other religions and just kind of squash out or retract like Islam did back into the Middle East area and all that kind of stuff? Folks, the church is international and universal because God wanted it to be that way. He forced the issue. He made them go into Europe, which was the hub of civilization, and He forced them to go out toward India and all that. And so everything worked out for the dispersal of the apostles into the various places and the dispersal of Christians who went everywhere preaching the Word, Acts chapter 8. So you join Acts chapter 8 all the way down through Acts 23, and you join that with 1 Corinthians, and you understand why Paul may have not understood what was going on, but God was in control, and God said, you be of good courage, I'm going to make you be in Rome. No shipwreck, nothing's going to happen to you that's going to keep you from getting there because I want the gospel spread, and that's why the church, even till today, still exists because God established it and said the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Okay, next question. I am thinking I read somewhere in the Scriptures, if we are faithful to the Lord, He will save our offspring or future generations. This was, I think, based on our prayers and our obedience to God. Can you help me find a scripture of similar reference? Is there anything in the Old Testament on this? Well, of course, you know, you got Old Testament stuff like Proverbs 22, verse 6. Instruct a child in the way that he is to go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. It does not say in Proverbs 22, 6 that they will never mess up. It simply says that when he is old, he will not depart from it. How many of you all... Okay, here's an example. I don't have a huge bunch of tools, but there is something invaluable that was passed on to me from my dad. I don't know how much money through the years I've saved on it. My dad wanted us to do basic mechanic work, which I've gotten away from a little bit the older I get, I'll admit, but I still held on to this one thing. That is, son, change your oil. Change your oil. Well, why would I do that? Well, you go over here and have this guy change it. Yeah, he'll do that, 40, 70 bucks, whatever it is, you know, they're going to charge at that particular place. Whereas you can go over here and buy you a filter and oil for a little over 20 bucks, or about $20 nowadays, and you can just change your own oil. And it doesn't take much time at all. Just go ahead and do that. Well, I could have acted like, well, I don't want to take time to do that. By the way, my parents are idiots anyway, right? So, you know, why do I want to do what he says? You can have that kind of an attitude, but looking back on it, when I get older, I get to thinking, Tim, how many hundreds of dollars have you saved over time because you simply bought you a socket set and got some wrenches and figured out how you could go out and change your own oil in whatever vehicle that you bought? You know, looked up on the internet, you know, and found out, oh, that's how I access that up in there, you know, and stuff, and see what kind of wrench or cap you need to get. Change your own oil. So people do that spiritually. You look back later on in life. You might not when you're a teenager, but later on in life, you look back on it and you say, wow, Mom and Dad were right. And doing it that way is the best way to be in life. I didn't serve Him or know that when I was 20. I still thought that they were idiots. At 30, I thought that they had a little bit of sense. But by the time you get later on in life, you realized, well, they actually understood the best all the time. And the reason they understood it best is because you're paying attention finally. When he is old, he will not depart from it. You come back to your raising, is what I'm trying to say. You come back to your raising. Okay, the further thing on this, Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Everybody knows about bring your children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And it says that here you got the first commandment with promise. The first commandment with promise means that there was promise from God of a prosperous, long life. In general, that's the proverb, if you serve God in this way, if you bring your children up in the nurture and admonition of God. Your offspring are going to be saved because they once again will come back to your teaching and understand that this keeps me safe. The reason that I am a safe individual is because they taught me the way of safety or salvation. Safe or saved is basically the same word. You want to be safe with God? You listen to the safe instructions from a godly set of parents, and they instruct you of how you can be prosperous later on in life. That's how you preserve the future generation. So Ephesians chapter 6, around down through verse 4 is very good on that. Also, you've got, finally, I'll just close out with 1 Corinthians 7. 1 Corinthians 7 and verse 14. Parents are not always on the same level spiritually. And listen to this. This goes along with somewhat of what the question was about. Where does it say that you save your offspring or future generations? Well, one has an effect on the other, one family member. The unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife. Isn't that amazing? 1 Corinthians 7, verse 14. The unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife. The unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. There is an effect inside the family. Else were your children unclean, but now they're holy. Some families will never hear of the gospel unless somebody from the outside brings it in, right? But as long as you got the foot in the door, you got the believing wife or the believing husband, there is a chance you get that whole family with the children lined up for God, and the result is what you see here tonight with us. That's how you get that going. 1 Corinthians 7:14. So there is an effect. Finally, I might want to mention 1 Timothy 2, I think at the end of the chapter. And so shall she be saved in childbearing, if she continue with faith and holiness with sobriety. So that passage goes along with that as well. She fulfills her purpose in passing on a godly way in the family. Okay, next question. This is, I think, number 7 or so. Which holy day is referred to in John chapter 19 and verse 31? Is it the day of unleavened bread? Exactly what's going on there? So let's go over to John 19 and look at what he's talking about here. Some people get confused over this. For those who like to read different books and look at different commentaries, I believe that this is a passage that Brother Kaufman got confused on a little bit. In fact, I know he did. On his timing and his dates and such as that, they seem to have missed the boat a little bit on it. So in John 19, verse 31, the Bible says, "The Jews, therefore, because it was the preparation that the bodies should not remain upon the cross on the Sabbath day, for that Sabbath was a high day, besought Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away." The problem is here is that when people think of Passover, they think of one day where you're eating that Passover meal, and that's the only concept of Passover the Jews had. That's not true. The Jews had a week of unleavened bread, didn't they? And the Saturday, the Sabbath that fell in that unleavened bread week was a high Sabbath. So it's within the time of the unleavened bread week of the time of Passover that Jesus takes of the Lord's Supper with His disciples. But the high Sabbath day, the Saturday that was inside that week, had not yet arrived. And so then, Jesus, they don't want Him out there hanging on the Sabbath day. Y'all got that, don't you? You got the idea? So what they did is they were going to have His legs broke, and the soldier come by and he pierced His side, and forthwith there came out blood and water, as you keep on reading on. Then you find in this passage that the whole Passover week is something that is under consideration. People read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then they get confused with John, and they wonder, well, what day is this? And they don't understand you're dealing with an unleavened bread week. And in that week, you've got a high Sabbath, if the days fall right, you know, according to certain Jewish calendar stuff, and therefore they were calling it by this name. So hopefully that will help you in your study a little bit. Don't think of the Passover as just, oh, they sat down one evening to a meal. There was more to it than that, much more. Read the Old Testament and then the New Testament, put them together, and it makes a whole lot of sense. You can read Leviticus 23, if you got a Bible you don't mind writing in, by John 19. You want to write in Leviticus 23, and that'll help you to understand the timing of it and all that too. Also Matthew 26. Okay, next question. In Matthew 7 and verse 7, it says, "Ask, seek, and knock." What was Jesus referring to when He said seek? This is a little bit of an example of over-investigation, trying to get a little bit too much detail. Ask, and it shall be given unto you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you, the Lord said. The asking, seeking, and knocking is not meant to be divvied up and torn apart as if you can tell exactly the difference between one or the other. That's not what Jesus was getting at. A man is supposed to serve the Lord with all his spirit, with all his soul, with all his body, right? Three things. When God says in the Shema, in the book of Deuteronomy, that a man is supposed to love the Lord with all your body and all your soul, all your mind or spirit, is He trying to pick us apart and say, now, here's how you're serving Him with your spirit, here's how you're serving Him with your body? He's not trying to pick us apart. He's saying every part of you serves God. He's not trying to give a big lesson on the difference between soul and spirit, for example, which is hard to do. But instead, what He's doing is He's putting us together for His service. Jesus is doing the same thing in the Sermon on the Mount. If you try to divide up and say, now I want to know the difference between asking and seeking, then you're missing the point. That's not the point Jesus is making. He's saying your reliance upon God will see you through. It is not significant to ask then, therefore, the difference between the seeking and the asking or the knocking. It is significant instead to understand the exceeding righteousness that the Lord demands in the Sermon on the Mount compared to the hypocrisy of the scribes and Pharisees that existed in His day. The aim is not once again to make a distinction between the three, but instead to get us to serve God first with complete righteousness, every part of us devoted to Him in every aspect of our lives, Matthew 6, verse 33. Okay, next question. We're almost done. What is the token of God's righteous judgment? 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 5. I tell you what, I'd like to finish on this one, so we'll stop right here. I can get to the others later. Let's go over to 2 Thessalonians 1 and verse 5. This will be a good one to finish on. We're going to have to back up because that's the middle of the sentence. Start at verse 3. 2 Thessalonians 1, beginning at verse 3. We are bound to thank God always for you, brethren, as it is meet, because your faith grows exceedingly. The charity, the love, of every one of you all toward each other abounds. Well, what's the point of that, Paul? So that we ourselves glory in you, in the churches of God, for your patience and faith in all your persecutions and tribulations that you endure. Man, you are really holding out. These people are mean to you, they are after you, and you are still Christians. We love that. Thank you. And then he says in verse 5, which, what is which here? Which, relative pronoun referring back to the endurance under persecution of verse 4. Which endurance under persecution is a manifest token of the righteous judgment of God. A token? Yeah, a token. Somebody does you wrong. They come after you and they start spreading all kinds of rumors and lies on you. You try to act like you're a Christian in front of them and they laugh at you. You try to get ahead and you can't get ahead because there's a buddy system, and since you're a Christian, you're not going to do anything that tries to go against the rules, and since you won't buck anything, and since you won't go in with them, and you won't frequent the same places the world goes and all that kind of stuff, they are against you and it seems you can't get ahead. The world makes you endure things. What is God doing during this whole time? He says God is making a token. What does he mean by that? He says, all right, I saw what happened. I saw what happened. It's a token of the righteous judgment of God, that you may be counted worthy of the kingdom of God for which you suffered. You come up to the day of judgment, and God looks at those people that were against you because you were Christian. God looks at those people who didn't want you to get ahead because you lived a good life and you didn't do anything but bless them and speak nice to them. And on the day of judgment, God looks at them and He says, nothing happened to you in this life. My servant didn't do a thing to harm you, and I didn't touch you. I sent the blessings of the sunshine and rain upon you just like I did my servant. But now, he goes to heaven. And now, since you didn't get it back then, you're going to get it now. Depart from me, you that work iniquity. I never knew you. And he casts them out. Christians enduring in this life, since the evil people don't get it here and now, God says that's a token. That's a piece of evidence to say, well, God's righteous, so that means He's going to let them have it later on. That's what that passage teaches. They don't get it now, but it's a token. Your endurance is a token now because that means you're going to cash that in later on. God will bless you, and He's going to take care of them. I don't know what happens. If you don't give an example here, people don't get it. So I'm going to give you an example. I want you to know that I'm going to give an example of somebody who's dead because I don't want anybody to think I'm playing favorites. And I don't want you to think that I'm saying that on the day of judgment that I've got him all figured out. Who can figure out a man like that anyway? But I'll say this. Let's say you got a guy like Hugh Hefner. He was the founder of the Playboy organization. Okay? We never read or didn't have any understanding that that man ever did anything than live in hedonism and in lustful pleasure, right? Now, if he repented, God knows, doesn't He? But that's why I said I'm not going to talk about anybody alive because there's nothing we can change about it either way. And I'm not trying to besmirch anybody, so I don't want to talk about anybody alive anyway. But if you got a man there and he lived and died in old age, rich and in pleasure, and somebody says, yeah, but what did he ever do for the Lord? He just downgraded women and made them look like a piece of meat his whole life. And here he just got away with it. God says, that's a token. He didn't get away with anything. Nobody gets away with anything. Think about it. God says, your endurance as a Christian is a token of the righteous judgment of God. I'll settle up. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I will repay. Nobody gets away with anything. Now, let's talk about your life and mine. I may not know what's going on in your life. You may have a totally hidden life, a hidden agenda. Same thing for you with respect to me. What man knows a man, save that man and the Spirit of the Lord that is within him? God knows him, and he knows himself, at least he ought to, and not to live a lie. But you don't know me. You don't know where I come from, and you don't know the sincerity of my thoughts. Same from me to you. But I do know this. The righteous judge is looking down on every one of us right now. And since He does know me, you are not going to appear on the day of judgment and be able to say, aha, I sure fooled Tim, didn't I? It won't make any difference, will it? And I won't be able to say, boy, I tell you what, I got the brethren to support me my whole life, and I didn't even really believe it. I'm telling you that I do believe it, but I'm not going to be able to fool God with that, am I? Everybody answers in the sincerity of their own heart to their Maker on the day of judgment, and you will not pull the wool over God's eyes at all. My friends, if there is a sin in your life and it's holding you back from the Lord, you need to come in Bible repentance. If there is a need you have to prepare your soul before God, the baptismal waters are warm and they are ready. We can baptize you into Christ tonight. There is no reason for anybody to appear before the judgment seat of God on high when He looks into your very soul and He knows all that you have been, and He knows whether you mean to be good or not, and He knows your best intentions, and He knows whether you followed through or not too, doesn't He? Because He sees everything we do or say. Why don't you get yourself ready to meet that God and His righteous judgment? Why don't you let us help you this evening as we stand and sing our song?